I was folding laundry in our bedroom when I saw the notification pop up on my husband's iPad. Sarah posted new photos from Paris. My blood turned to ice as I scrolled through images of my husband of 14 years, sharing croissants and champagne with a woman half my age in front of the Eiffel Tower. 14 years, 2 children, countless sacrifices, and he had never, not once, taken me on a single trip. "We can't afford vacations," he'd always said. "We need to save for the kids' college funds." Meanwhile, I watched him wine and dine his 26-year-old secretary in the most romantic city in the world, staying at hotels that cost more per night than our monthly grocery budget. But here's what he didn't know. I wasn't the same broken woman who used to cry herself to sleep while he worked late at the office. The woman staring at those photos had been quietly planning, quietly growing stronger, quietly preparing for this exact moment. As I heard his key in the front door, returning from his business conference, I closed the iPad and smiled. He was about to discover that his loyal, submissive wife had died somewhere between the Louvre selfie and the Seine sunset photo. The woman he was about to face was someone entirely different, someone he had created through years of neglect and betrayal, and she was about to change everything. My name is Rebecca, and at 42, I thought I had the perfect suburban life. 2 beautiful children, Emma 12 and Jake 9, a 4-bedroom house in Connecticut, and a husband who provided well for our family. David worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, traveling frequently but always coming home with stories about boring conferences and difficult clients. I had given up my career as a marketing coordinator when Emma was born. David convinced me it made financial sense. Daycare costs, his promotion potential, the importance of having a stable parent at home. I threw myself into being the perfect wife and mother. PTA meetings, soccer practices, elaborate birthday parties, home-cooked meals every night. I managed our finances, organized our social calendar, and kept our household running like clockwork. Our relationship had settled into a comfortable routine. We'd been together since college. He was the charming business major. I was the creative type who fell for his confidence and ambition. We married at 25, bought our first house at 27, had our children by 30. From the outside, we looked like the American dream, but somewhere along the way, I had become invisible in my own marriage. David would come home, kiss my cheek absently, ask about the kids' day, then disappear into his home office for important calls. Our conversations revolved around logistics: who was picking up whom, what bills needed paying, when the next parent-teacher conference was scheduled. Romance had died slowly, suffocated by routine and his increasing emotional distance. I told myself this was normal. Marriage wasn't supposed to be a fairy tale forever. Real love was about partnership, commitment, building a life together. When I suggested weekend getaways or date nights, David would sigh and mention work stress, upcoming deadlines, the expense of babysitters. Maybe next month became his standard response to any suggestion of couple time. Meanwhile, I watched my friends' marriages with growing envy. Lisa's husband surprised her with a weekend in Napa for their anniversary. Janet's spouse planned elaborate date nights. Even my divorced friend Michelle seemed happier and more alive than I felt in my stable marriage. I started noticing small changes in David about 8 months ago. New cologne, more attention to his appearance, later nights at the office, weekend emergency meetings that seemed to happen with increasing frequency. When I asked about his day, his answers became vague, distracted. "You're being paranoid," I told myself. "He's just stressed about work." But a woman's intuition is rarely wrong. I began paying closer attention. The way he guarded his phone, how he showered immediately after coming home from client dinners, the unfamiliar charges on our credit card that he explained away as business expenses. The most painful part wasn't the growing suspicion of infidelity. It was the realization that I had become a stranger in my own life. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had lost herself completely. My dreams, my ambitions, my sense of self-worth, all sacrificed on the altar of being the good wife. I had gained 30 pounds since our wedding, stopped wearing makeup regularly, lived in yoga pants and oversized sweaters. I couldn't remember the last time I'd read a book for pleasure, pursued a hobby, or had a conversation about anything other than household management and child rearing. The woman David had married, confident, creative, independent, had been slowly erased, replaced by a domestic servant who asked for nothing and expected even less. But that night, staring at those Paris photos, something fundamental shifted inside me. The woman who had been dormant for over a decade suddenly woke up, furious and ready to reclaim her life. But everything started to unravel when David hired Sarah as his new assistant 6 months ago. He came home that first day unusually animated, talking about this brilliant young woman who was going to revolutionize their office efficiency. Sarah was fresh out of college, eager to learn, and according to David, exactly what the company needed to modernize their approach. I should have paid attention to the way his eyes lit up when he talked about her. The changes started subtly. David began staying later at work, claiming Sarah was helping him organize a major client presentation. He started dressing better. New shirts, expensive ties, cologne I didn't recognize. When I complimented his appearance, he'd brush it off. Sarah mentioned that professional image matters in sales. Sarah's name began appearing in every conversation. Sarah suggested we try this new restaurant for client meetings. Sarah found a more efficient way to track our quarterly reports. Sarah thinks I should consider speaking at the industry conference. I felt like a third wheel in my own marriage, competing with a woman I'd never met for my husband's attention and enthusiasm. The first major red flag came during Emma's school play. David had promised to attend, but called an hour before curtain time. Emergency client crisis, he explained, his voice echoing strangely. Sarah and I need to handle this tonight. I'm so sorry, honey. Tell Emma I'll make it up to her. Later, I discovered through a mutual friend that David and a young blonde woman had been seen at an upscale wine bar that same evening, laughing intimately over shared appetizers. When I confronted him, he exploded. Are you seriously going to start acting jealous and paranoid now? Sarah is my colleague. We were discussing the Henderson account over dinner. This is exactly why I don't tell you about work anymore. You turn everything into some ridiculous conspiracy theory. His gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed him. Almost. The second incident happened during our anniversary. I had planned a special dinner at home. Candles, his favorite meal, a new dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. David arrived 3 hours late, claiming a client emergency had kept him at the office. Sarah stayed to help me finish the presentation, he explained, barely glancing at the cold dinner or my carefully chosen outfit. You know how important this account is for our family's future. He showered immediately, claiming he smelled like the office, then fell asleep watching television. Our 14th anniversary passed without a kiss, a meaningful conversation, or any acknowledgement of what the day represented. That night, lying next to my snoring husband, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to start paying attention, really paying attention, to the man I had married. I began documenting inconsistencies in his stories. The client dinner that supposedly ended at 11 p.m., when restaurants in our area closed at 10. The weekend conference that had no online presence when I searched for it. The emergency meetings that never appeared on his work calendar, which I had access to for family planning purposes. Most telling were the credit card statements, expensive restaurants I'd never been to, hotel charges in our own city, jewelry purchases that never made it home to me, lingerie from Victoria's Secret in sizes that definitely weren't mine. When I tried to discuss my concerns, David's responses became increasingly hostile. You're being ridiculous, Rebecca. I work hard to provide for this family, and instead of being grateful, you're creating drama based on your own insecurities. Maybe if you took better care of yourself, you wouldn't be so paranoid about other women, he said during one particularly cruel argument. Sarah appreciates hard work and ambition. She doesn't spend all day in sweatpants complaining about imaginary problems. That comment cut deeper than any physical blow could have. It revealed exactly how David saw me, not as his partner, but as an obstacle to his happiness, a burden he tolerated rather than a woman he cherished. But his cruelty had an unexpected effect. Instead of breaking me further, it began to wake something up inside me. The woman I used to be, strong, independent, unwilling to accept disrespect, started stirring back to life. I realized I had two choices: continue being the invisible wife who accepted scraps of attention and affection, or become someone worthy of respect again. The decision was easier than I expected. The breaking point came during Jake's 9th birthday party in our backyard. I had spent weeks planning the perfect celebration: superhero decorations, a custom cake, activities for 15 excited children. David had promised to help set up and stay for the entire party. Instead, he disappeared 20 minutes after the first guests arrived. "Work emergency," he whispered, already heading toward his car. "Sarah needs help with the Morrison contract. I'll be back before cake time." I watched him drive away while our son searched the crowd of parents for his father's face. The disappointment in Jake's eyes was devastating. But what happened next was worse. My neighbor Linda approached me hesitantly. "Rebecca, I don't want to overstep, but I saw David at Riverside Park yesterday afternoon with a young woman. They were very close. I thought you should know." Riverside Park, where David claimed he'd been in back-to-back client meetings all afternoon. That evening, after the last guest had left and the children were in bed, I confronted him. "Linda saw you at the park yesterday, with Sarah." David's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, then cold calculation. "Linda needs to mind her own business. Sarah was upset about a personal issue. I was being a supportive supervisor. If you have a problem with me showing basic human compassion to my colleagues, that says more about you than me." But I was done being manipulated. "Show me your phone." "Absolutely not. I'm not going to be treated like a criminal in my own home because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." The phrase, midlife crisis, was perfectly chosen to wound. At 42, I was already sensitive about aging, about becoming invisible. David knew exactly which buttons to push. Over the following weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I started checking his location through our shared phone plan. The late meetings were happening at restaurants across town. The weekend conferences placed him at hotels when he claimed to be in boardrooms. I hired a private investigator, using money from my secret savings account that David didn't know existed. Within a week, I had photos of my husband and Sarah holding hands at outdoor cafes, kissing in parking lots, entering hotels together. But the Paris photos were different. They weren't stolen moments or secret meetings. They were a full romantic vacation, the kind of trip I had begged for throughout our entire marriage. I studied every image obsessively. David feeding Sarah strawberries at a sidewalk cafe, the two of them posing in front of Notre Dame. Sarah wearing a necklace I recognized from our credit card statement. The client gift David had claimed was for an important female customer. The most painful photo showed them in what was clearly their hotel room, Sarah wearing a silk negligee, David's arms wrapped around her from behind as they looked out at the Paris skyline. The intimacy in that image was something I hadn't experienced with my own husband in years. But as I scrolled through their romantic European adventure, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling destroyed, I felt liberated. For months, I had been questioning my sanity, wondering if I was imagining problems that didn't exist. The photos provided brutal clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was married to a man who was capable of deep romantic love, just not with me. That night, I made a series of phone calls. First, to a divorce attorney my friend had recommended. Second, to my old boss at the marketing firm, asking about freelance opportunities. Third, to my sister, asking if she could watch the kids for a weekend while I handled some personal business. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at myself honestly in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me was tired, defeated, invisible. But underneath the exhaustion and extra weight, I could still see traces of the confident woman I used to be. David thought he was coming home to the same broken wife who would cry, beg, and ultimately forgive him for anything. He had no idea that his Paris vacation with Sarah had actually set me free. The woman he was about to face had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. David returned from his business conference on a Sunday evening. whistling as he wheeled his suitcase through our front door. He kissed my cheek absently, the same perfunctory gesture he'd performed for years. "How was Paris?" I asked quietly, not looking up from the magazine I was pretending to read. He froze. "What did you say?" I asked how Paris was. The Eiffel Tower looked beautiful in Sarah's Instagram photos. Though I have to say, that hotel room with the skyline view must have cost a fortune. Funny how you always told me we couldn't afford vacations. The color drained from David's face. For 30 seconds he said nothing, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Rebecca, I can explain." "Can you?" I stood up slowly, my voice eerily calm. "Can you explain 14 years of marriage where you never once took me on a trip? Can you explain why our anniversary dinners happen at Applebee's, but Sarah gets 5-star restaurants in the most romantic city in the world?" "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think." The explosion came from somewhere deep inside me, years of suppressed rage finally erupting. "You made me feel crazy for months. You called me paranoid, insecure, ridiculous. You made me question my own sanity while you were planning romantic getaways with your secretary." David's shock was quickly replaced by his familiar defensive anger. "You want to know the truth, Rebecca? Fine. Yes, I'm in love with Sarah. Yes, we went to Paris together. And yes, it was the most alive I've felt in years." The words hit like physical blows, but I remained standing. "Sarah appreciates me," he continued, his voice gaining cruel momentum. "She doesn't spend all day in yoga pants complaining about everything. She's excited about life, about adventure, about building something meaningful together. When's the last time you made me feel wanted instead of just tolerated?" I let him finish his verbal assault, watching him reveal exactly who he really was. "Are you done?" I asked when he finally stopped talking. "Rebecca, we can work this out. Sarah was a mistake. I got caught up in something that felt exciting, but, oh, David." I smiled, actually smiled, for the first time in months. "You think I'm going to fight for you. You think I'm going to beg you to choose me over her." His expression shifted to confusion. "Let me be very clear," I said, my voice carrying a strength that surprised us both. "I'm not fighting for you. I'm done, completely done. You want to be with Sarah? Perfect. You can explain to Emma and Jake why Daddy chose his secretary over their family. You can explain to your parents why their son threw away 14 years for a woman barely older than their granddaughter." David's face went white. "You can't tell the kids. You can't destroy my relationship with them because you're angry." "I'm not destroying anything," I continued, my voice rising. "You already did that. I'm just refusing to help you hide it anymore. And here's the beautiful part, David. While you were in Paris playing house with your girlfriend, I was meeting with divorce attorneys, financial advisors, and private investigators." The confidence drained from his face completely. "You see, I'm not the same broken woman you left behind. The woman standing in front of you has been documenting everything. Every lie, every secret charge, every fake business trip. I have photos, receipts, witness statements. I know about the money you've been moving around, the accounts you thought I didn't know about. Rebecca, please. I have one question for you," I said, stepping closer. "When you were feeding her strawberries in that Parisian cafe, did you think about your children at home? Did you think about the woman who gave up her career, her dreams, her entire identity to build a life with you?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "Your silence tells me everything I need to know." What happened next shocked both of us. David collapsed into our kitchen chair, his head in his hands, and began to sob. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen him use to get out of trouble before, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere genuine. "God, Rebecca, what have I done?" he whispered between gasps. "What have I become?" For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I don't know who I am anymore," he continued, his voice breaking. "When did I become the kind of man who lies to his children, who breaks promises to his wife, who throws away everything good in his life for what? Excitement. Validation from a 26-year-old who doesn't even know what real love looks like?" I remained silent, watching this man I'd lived with for 14 years finally see himself clearly. "Sarah doesn't love me," he said. the realization hitting him like a physical blow. She loves the expensive dinners, the trips, the attention. When I told her about you finding out, you know what she said? She said maybe this was a sign that we should take a break while I sorted out my family situation. She didn't want to fight for us. She just disappeared. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman he'd chosen over his family had abandoned him the moment things got complicated. I've lost everything, haven't I? He asked, finally looking at me with eyes full of genuine remorse. My children are going to hate me. You're going to divorce me. My parents are going to be devastated. And for what? For someone who never really cared about me at all. But here's what David didn't understand. His breakdown, while perhaps genuine, had come too late. You're right, I said quietly. You have lost everything, but not because of Sarah. You lost everything the moment you decided I wasn't worth fighting for. You lost everything when you chose to make me feel invisible instead of cherished. You lost everything when you prioritized a fantasy over the real family that loved you unconditionally. I know, he whispered. I know, and I'm so sorry. Rebecca, please. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. We'll move somewhere new. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you. David. I sat down across from him, my voice gentle but firm. Do you know what I've been doing while you were falling apart over Sarah? He shook his head. I've been remembering who I used to be. I started working out again. I called my old boss and landed 3 freelance marketing contracts. I've been reading, learning, growing. I've been rediscovering the woman you fell in love with in college. Except now she's stronger, wiser, and she knows her worth. David's eyes filled with something that looked like hope. And that woman, I continued, deserves a partner who chooses her every single day. Who takes her to Paris not because he's trying to make up for an affair, but because he can't imagine experiencing something beautiful without her by his side. The hope in his eyes began to fade as he understood what I was saying. I'm not the same woman you betrayed, I explained. And you're not the same man I married. We've both changed, but in opposite directions. You became someone who could lie to his children and betray his wife. I became someone who refuses to accept less than she deserves. So there's no chance? He asked, his voice barely audible. There's always a chance for you to become a better person, I said. There's a chance for you to be an amazing father to Emma and Jake. There's a chance for you to learn from this and never hurt another woman the way you've hurt me. But there's no chance for us. Not anymore. David cried harder then, and I realized something profound. I felt compassion for him, but I no longer felt responsible for his pain. The divorce papers will be served tomorrow, I said, standing up. I'm not trying to destroy you, David. I'm just refusing to save you from the consequences of your own choices. As I walked towards the stairs, he called after me. Rebecca, I love you. I know I have a terrible way of showing it, but I do love you. I turned back to look at him one final time. I believe you do love me, David, but you love yourself more. And that's exactly why this marriage is over. That night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The woman who had been drowning in her own marriage had finally learned how to breathe again. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment, a bright, airy space that I chose and decorated entirely for myself, writing this story for all of you who might be living in your own version of invisible. The divorce was finalized last month. David fought it initially, hiring an expensive attorney and trying to paint me as an unstable wife who was destroying the family over a momentary lapse in judgment. But the evidence I'd gathered was overwhelming, and eventually his lawyer advised him to settle. I got primary custody of Emma and Jake, the house, which I promptly sold, and half of everything we'd built together. More importantly, I got my life back. The kids were devastated initially, as I knew they would be. Emma especially struggled with anger toward both of us, toward David for his betrayal, and toward me for breaking up the family. It took months of family therapy and countless difficult conversations, but we're healing together. Jake surprisingly adapted more quickly. Mom, he said one evening while we were making dinner together, you smile now, like really smile. You didn't do that before Dad moved out. Out of the mouths of babes. David sees the children every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. He's trying to be a better father. I'll give him credit for that. He's also in therapy, working through whatever drove him to blow up his life for a fantasy. Sarah, as predicted, disappeared from his life the moment things got complicated. Last I heard, she'd moved to another city for a better opportunity. As for me, I've been busy rebuilding the woman I used to be, but better. I lost 35 pounds, not for anyone else, but because I wanted to feel strong and healthy again. I started my own marketing consulting business, which is already more successful than I dared hope. I've traveled more in the past 6 months than I did in the previous 14 years combined. Last month, Emma, Jake, and I spent a long weekend in Boston, exploring museums and eating amazing food. Next summer, we're planning a trip to Ireland, something I've dreamed about since college. I've also started dating, which feels surreal after so many years of marriage. I'm taking it slowly, learning to trust my instincts again, remembering what it feels like to be pursued and appreciated rather than tolerated. But the most important change isn't external, it's internal. I've learned to recognize my own worth again. I've learned that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel invisible. I've learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to demand better, to start over. The woman who discovered those Paris photos was broken, defeated, convinced she deserved whatever scraps of love she could get. The woman writing this story knows she deserves the whole damn feast. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, you are not crazy. You are not asking for too much. You are not responsible for fixing someone who doesn't want to be fixed. Your instincts are probably right, and you deserve so much more than you're accepting. If you're the woman making excuses for why your partner never prioritizes you, stop. If you're the woman who's lost herself trying to be perfect for someone who doesn't appreciate perfection, stop. If you're the woman who's afraid to leave because you don't know who you are without him, I promise you, she's still in there, waiting for you to set her free. It took me 14 years to learn that lesson. Don't let it take you that long. The most beautiful part of my story isn't that David got his comeuppance or that Sarah revealed her true colors. The most beautiful part is that I remembered I was worth fighting for, even if I had to be the one doing the fighting. These days, when I look in the mirror, I see someone I recognize again, someone strong, confident, and completely unwilling to settle for less than she deserves. Someone who might just take herself to Paris someday, not because she's running from anything, but because she's finally running toward the life she's always wanted. To everyone who made it this far, have you ever had to choose between staying in a comfortable lie or facing a difficult truth? How did you find the courage to choose yourself? Share your stories in the comments. Sometimes we all need to hear that we're not alone in these struggles. And remember, you are never too old, too settled, or too scared to start over. The life you deserve is waiting for you to be brave enough to claim it. Update. Emma just asked if she can bring a friend on our Ireland trip. I said yes, and she hugged me so tight I almost cried. This is what happiness feels like.